Welcome to the Highly Addictive Podcast. I'm Mike.
And I'm Josh.
And tonight we have a very special guest. Kristine is with us tonight. And just to put a disclaimer out there to any listeners and any future prospective guests, when we ask people to come on this podcast, we always ask them if they want to go by an alias to preserve their anonymity. If there's any points of discussion or questions or topics that they're not comfortable with, we will totally respect that. Kristine basically said, I don't give a fuck. I'm an open book, and is just laying it all out there. So a little bit of introduction. You are our first guest, and I'm pretty excited that you're our first guest because I think you're a really good ambassador for recovery. You're really hardworking. You're a personal trainer. You just started up your own cleaning business, but you're also really involved in the community. You give back. You sponsor people. You're always there when somebody's struggling. They can reach out to you, and you even you're going to schools and reaching out. So it's just. Yeah, anyways, enough blowing smoke up your ass. Why don't you say hi?
Thanks, Mike. That was awesome. I'm so flattered. I'm excited to be on here. When you asked me to be on here and kind of what your guys' mission is with this podcast, I couldn't help but get excited. I think there's not enough people willing to talk about the uncomfortable shit. And like you said, right, I don't give a fuck. I think shame and societal expectations kind of prevent us all from speaking our truth. And I think the truth can actually help other people, right? So, yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for coming on.
Welcome.
And that's kind of what we're about here. We're about just giving people the fucking straight goods and not putting on airs. I think that's a problem, is there's this kind of air of being disingenuous, a lot with kind of people who work in the recovery field, but also from people who are in recovery. They're trying to come across as angels and stuff. We're just, the thing of it is, we don't want to discount the work that people are doing and the change that they're making in their life, but, let's just be honest about where we came from and what we struggle with. And I think that's how we affect change, is through having those uncomfortable conversations and just being really real. So
totally. And I know for myself, I spent my whole life not speaking my truth, whether it be owning my story, trauma, whatever it may be, and it actually prevented me from being successful in any endeavor in my life. Addiction, I know for myself, I was an addict long before I ever picked up. Right. And I don't think that gets talked about enough either. I wanted to disengage and disattach from a young age, and it kind of carried on until my 20s, and it started in this town. Poverty and abuse and all those sorts of things just led me down a pretty fucked up path, right? And the recovery in this community is amazing. But there's pros and cons to everything, right? And I don't think people really know from our perspective as addicts in recovery what that looks like. The good, bad, or the indifferent,
Yeah, I think talking about living in our truth too, it's like a double-edged sword as well, right? Because you'll have people that really lean into, like you guys are saying, the angel complex, I that's my past, and I'm so much better now and all these things. But how many fucking 6-month kingpins I've met that are oh, I'm clean now, but man, I used to fucking run Surrey or whatever the fuck, right? And you're
yeah,
dude, how are all of you guys the fucking kingpin? This is insane, right? And
everybody was a big time.
Yeah, exactly, right? Oh man, I used to move so much, and you're just bro, just chill the fuck out, right? We're all just trying to be clean. No one's impressed by this anymore, but. I mean, yeah, it's funny, you see people come into this town that have this, crazy chip on their shoulder about, oh, man, this is a small town. I used to run the big city, man. It's fucking ridiculous sometimes.
So I think there's something to be said for that. People have, especially people in recovery, have a certain kind of love-hate relationship with war stories.
Yeah, true.
I guess, because like you said, like people will rely on them, especially when they're new, to kind of get credibility, or they're trying to wear a mask or something. But at the same time, people can be kind of shy away from it. I guess rightfully because you don't want to glamorize the behaviors and the life that you're trying to get away from. But I think that's an important part of what me and Josh kind of decided when we were starting this. Is like, we want people to come on here and share some of their war stories.
Yeah, I guess I'm a fucking hypocrite because, like, yeah, I literally wanted to call this fucking podcast War Stories, but they already had one.
There's like a Fox News.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
And it's like actual war stories
it's
from
like
veterans
and shit.
Oh,
yeah, so,
yeah.
it's like,
A little dramatic there.
yeah.
Well, I think for me, like, with my war stories and even hearing them, I mean, it used to be some sort of, I guess, trigger. Whereas for me now, I can see the humor in my own war stories. It doesn't bring me back to that shitty feeling I'm a shitty person. It's like, holy fuck, I did that?
Yeah.
Holy shit. And it also gives me empathy for people who are still in active addiction doing fucked up shit. Right? Whereas, like, I've met people even in the rooms who, oh my god, I can't believe I just saw that person doing that. Well, fuck, have you not been that person? I've been that person. Like, even today, I was in the car with my sponsor, and she was looking for something, and I said, oh, do we need to get out and have a car flail? And now she's got, like, 25 years, so she didn't know what I was talking about. And I said, well, fuck, if you couldn't find your shit, and somebody thought they had it, and you got to get the fuck out of the car, start flailing around looking for your shit, rubbing on the carpet, seeing if anything comes up, if something does sift through your hands.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there can be humor in it. But like you said, right, some people can glamorize it and they can really find that title for who the fuck they thought they were. And some people do the opposite, and it's like they're trying to pull at somebody's heartstrings to show them that, yeah, you know, like, I was at that place too. So I think it can go from both ends of the spectrum, you know?
I think, like, how you react to war stories or tell them kind of is indicative of, like, where you're at as well, right? Because,
Totally.
like, when I used to be triggered by mine, like, it was just because, like, I feel like I was kind of going through, like, a grief period of, like, oh, man, I'm never going to be able to fucking steal bottles to fucking buy dope again and shit like that, you know what I mean? Where you're, like, romanticizing this, like, shitty life that, like, that is just, like, all twisted in your head as, like, kind of a good time still, you know?
Yeah, but on that note, I think that one thing that should be noted is like there's also the fact that people get too far removed from their past and stuff, and then they can tend to get into kind of this, you get too much, you know, not too much time, but you get enough time in, you start to forget where you came from, and then you kind of put yourself up on a pedestal and start getting this moral high ground. And I feel like I was talking with a friend went to her place for dinner last night, because we were talking about her coming on, and she was saying that she had a sponsor who, you know, she's sharing all this kind of trauma and all the kind of stuff that, you know, maybe some of her own war stories, and her sponsor doesn't say anything, and she says, well, how come you haven't shared anything with me? Oh, well, I can't relate to anything that you shared with me. And it was just like, that's so awkward.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, how do you have a relationship and trust your recovery into someone who can't relate to you and is just kind of, there's like an air of indifference there. I feel like that is a better way to relate to addicts, to reach people who are struggling, is to let them know, like, the kind of places that we've been into.
Well, yeah, and where we come from, right? I mean, I'll never forget the first time I heard somebody in a meeting share on sexual abuse as a child. You know, I didn't know that there was other people that had experienced the horrific things that I had, and they were clean, right? Like, that experience was amazing. And, you know, I can't, bless her heart though, like, getting that kind of cold response from a sponsor, right? Like, that connection of trauma, war stories, relationships, whatever it may be. I think that connection is huge, right? The opposite of addiction is connection.
Yeah, I think with no, touching on what you were saying there, like once you get enough time, like also your life becomes less about just like becoming recovered, right? So like you start getting this feeling of like that you yourself are getting better, not that you're better than other people, but you're getting better than your previous self, and you kind of do lose connection until I found for myself when I've gone through those scenarios or like those like periods of time in my recovery of having your eyes opened by like, you know, someone in active addiction or someone in early recovery, like having the sorts of struggles that you had and like realizing like after maybe judging that sort of person for a couple months on end, like, holy fuck, like I used to be like right there, you know, and it kind of hits you all of a sudden, like almost like an epiphany, like, holy shit, like who am I to like fucking judge this person? Like, even though like what they are doing is like fucked and like, but like you're like, holy shit, like I used to be doing that shit like all the time, or I used to be, you know, crying about this stupid like 2-month drama bullshit that doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, putting yourself in other people's shoes, like, can really get you out of that headspace of like, oh, like why don't they just get their shit together or whatever, right?
Totally.
So without any further ado, like, why don't you spill some dirt?
All right. I'll kind of like give you guys a little rundown on where I come from and how I got into recovery and what that's looked like for me a little bit. The Reader's Digest version, because ain't nobody got time for an 8-hour podcast.
Yeah, well, that honestly, that always bugs me, especially when somebody's like, Kate, and it starts out like, I guess it started when I was 5, and you're like, oh my god, like there's no way you're gonna be able to wrap this up, and this is going over the 5-minute mark, so.
I'll be 30 this year, and I grew up in Texas. I moved up here when I was 11. Went through a Lutheran school, had religion shoved down my throat, extreme sexual trauma at 5, started an eating disorder, and that kind of was the beginning of that obsessive mind wanting to fill a void. Started at a young age. So that carried on pretty much until I moved up here. I was about 10 and a half, 11. At that point, knowing my sexuality, not talking about it. I had talked to my mom briefly about my trauma. A couple months after we moved up here, my uncle molested me. Nobody listened to me. I was unheard. My feelings weren't validated. And pretty much that was the pivotal mark for me, saying, fuck it. Fuck it. Nothing's making me feel good. No, I'm not a part of. My parents don't give a shit. So I looked for the people that would allow me to feel a part of. And those were the people who came from broken homes, were just as damaged as I was. And we kind of all hung out together. We drank, started using drugs at 12. And then that skyrocketed from there, right? I was in abusive relationships, major codependency issues, abuse. I got into prostitution near the end of my addiction. Terrible, unspeakable things, right? And for me, there wasn't much glamorizing my addiction. The only remote part of my addiction that was glamorized was I worked up north for about 6 months, made a fuckload of money, lived the Alberta dream, and it dwindled from there. There was never enough. Spent money that I was supposed to use for college, $70,000 gone in 6 months. And my rock bottom, I was living in a bedroom. I worked 2 jobs. I made easily over $6,000 a month. I had a dog who did not get enough attention. And shortly after my grandmother passed away, I overdosed. And my friend at the time walked in and saw me foaming at the mouth, and I was blue, and her daughter was with her, and that was pretty traumatizing for her. I hadn't taken my dog out in a couple of days, hadn't fed him, and I realized at that point I had been in this position before so many fucking times There was no way in hell I could get myself out of this anymore. I already tried. I'd done that. Hadn't worked. So I called my mom and I said, look, I need to get the fuck out of here. I'm going to die. I am going to die. So I moved back here. I stopped using and I was miserable. I thought about suicide every day. Tried a few times. Shame and guilt wouldn't allow me to because I didn't want to hurt my mother. And I got so emotionally dead and no spirit. And I was working under the table because I didn't want to have to commit to a full-time honest job. And a woman I briefly met walked into the place I was working at, saw I was struggling, and I just started crying. I had never cried in front of anyone in my life. And I said, I don't know what to do. I'm so sick of living like this. I keep repeating the same thing over and over again. I don't know any other way to live. And she took me to my first meeting. And, you know, the rooms have been great for me in my recovery. I've learned a lot about myself, about how to live a life without drugs and alcohol. But it's really been a lot of outside help too for me, which is something I don't think that gets discussed a lot either. In recovery is mental health. You know, how many people struggle with that? I mean, I went to the psych ward in recovery because of my mental health. Recovery's been great. I've gone through some shit, but I've stayed clean and sober, and there's so many components to my recovery. It's not just the rooms, it's the people. It's like, you know, Mike had mentioned, I do sponsor people, which is an amazing feeling to remember that I came from that broken place and my brokenness can help somebody else. You know, I've done volunteer work. I've done personal training, and Mike is correct. I did start my own business because I can do things now that I've always wanted to do. You know, I didn't have dreams before, and going to high school and sharing my story was really cool. And I am planning on doing more things like that, talking on podcasts or radios or whatever it may be, to share where I've come from and where I'm at now. You know, and that I don't have to let my pain destroy me. I can turn that into something else and help other people with that. So yeah, that's the Reader's Digest version of where I've come from.
Were you keeping time? Was that 5 minutes or?
I didn't have the time on.
Did I actually time that?
I don't know. I wasn't taking time. I thought you were.
That was very succinct.
Yeah. No, that was good. Thanks for sharing that with us. Like, if you don't mind me asking, what was like your DOC, or like was there like a drug that you're using like every day?
Oh yeah, Coke.
Yeah.
Coke.
And like when you OD'd, that you were using Coke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had gotten some fucked up shit.
Yeah. Well, it seems like that's a lot more prevalent now. Like,
exactly.
People want to be like, oh, I only did Coke. I didn't do harder stuff. And then you're like, people die all the time from doing Coke, like, because that shit's all mixed in, right? And I don't know. It's weird. Do you go to school now? No,
I'm planning on going back to school to get certified in nutrition, and I'd like to get some sort of anatomy of the human body to work with people. My idea is to work with people in recovery who, you know, need help getting physically active, need help with nutrition, because these are all things that for most of us, we were loaded when we were younger. We don't know how to do these things, right? So again, helping people is kind of my thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool.
So, I mean, listening to like kind of to your story, you're right. There's not a lot there that sounds real glamorous, but I mean, as you know, and I think as we all know, like it doesn't. I mean, addiction, like substance abuse and addiction, it doesn't just start out. Nobody, you know, is in the classroom 5 years old and says, you know, I want to be that guy shooting dope in an alley. That's what I want to grow up to be. Like, it's a very slow process. So, and you're up there living the Alberta dream. And for anybody who doesn't know the Alberta dream, it's pretty much going up, getting some of that oil money, getting paid, maybe get a big truck, maybe
Car.
you're at the bar spending lots of money, strippers, coke, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Was that? I mean, there was no points at that point where you're glamorous, or like, you know what I mean?
Touche, Mike. Touche. If I had to really think about glamorous parts, that would be the most glamorous, because I had the financial means to live a glamorous life on the outside, right? Strip clubs. Oh my God, yes. Oh my God, all the time, thousands on thousands on thousands. Big, huge penthouse parties with other people that worked up north. All kinds of different activities with strippers. The list goes on. I mean, there was numerous fun nights, but I was always the person who turned it into a fun week or 2 weeks.
Right. So is that kind of the MO? Is that you'd wake up in the morning and you're like, let's keep going?
Oh.
It's like...
Most of the time I didn't even sleep. I mean, there's 2 weeks there I didn't sleep. I just kept going.
And then people just kind of petered, like, okay, I gotta get back to work. Or,
yeah, and then
like, really?
it pretty much just petered off into me, myself, and I, or the significant other I had at the time, if I had one, right? But I also took great pride in being the last one standing.
Oh, of course.
Right?
Like, all these guys are lightweights, and like I'm fucking out drinking the whole room or out fucking using the whole room.
What, your nose is stuffed up already?
Yeah.
Snort some water, you pansy.
Yeah, exactly. Fuck.
So you're out drinking the boys, you're partying with stuff. So at this time, and this is something I want to, because, like, how did exploring your sexuality, because you're in a relationship with a lovely woman at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
What was that process like as far as how did it change? Like, obviously your sexuality doesn't change because you get sober.
I think it's the acceptance and walking in my truth. That has been a result of being in recovery. I always knew, in all honesty, that I was gay from a very young age. My first kiss was a girl. The trauma I went through at a young age, there was a little girl that I had connected with, and that's why I wanted to be in that situation, was because I liked her. My childhood and religion kind of stifled that in me. I was brought up thinking that, homosexuality is a sin. If you like the same sex, you're going to go to hell. It's unforgivable. It's disgusting. I had my first girlfriend when I was 13, and we got shamed. We got yelled at for holding hands, and being somebody who always wanted validation and approval, I was like, okay, well, I can't do that. I guess I got to be with Mid now. I was never happy in a relationship with a man. I never enjoyed myself sexually by any fucking means. But I always did it because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. That this was the normal thing to do. I already knew I was an addict and I had a problem, but I thought that would give me some normalcy. I realized probably after about 6 months into recovery and doing a thorough set of steps that this is a huge part of my truth that I'm not speaking. I tried being with men in early recovery and that didn't work. And I had to get honest and tell people around me, like, look, like, I'm really struggling with accepting my sexuality and being honest about it. Fear of judgment. All of those fears. And it's just like everything I've started to talk about that I haven't in my lifetime, it's not really that big of a deal. People were accepting, people were loving, and none of my friends cared. And go figure, my mother was not surprised.
But it's a huge weight off your... Because I know there's, talking to some people, like, when, again, it's not an uncommon story where they're gay, they haven't been able to come to terms to it, or maybe they're already married to somebody in the opposite sex, and they're, for whatever reason, trying to force themselves into a role that just isn't them, and that ends up being a huge source of just resentment. It almost feeds wanting to continue to escape with drugs and alcohol.
Oh, totally. I think it's common, not just it's common for people in and out of the rooms, in and out of recovery. The whole issue with accepting our sexuality for whatever it may be. I know a few people in the rooms that have had the same issue I have had with it. And it's cool. Like, this year was my second year going to Pride with my partner, and it was cool to be able to do that with my partner, my friends, and have that support from people, my straight guy friends hanging out and wearing a rainbow and not giving a shit. It's been a huge relief for me, on so many fucking levels, because I can just be myself and not give a shit.
Nice. Weird. I had a question, but I totally forgot it now. Because that's just what happens when there's a lull in conversation. But fuck, it was something around earlier in your life. Oh yeah, like what you were saying near the beginning of your story. You were saying how you had always known that you're an addict even before you picked up. Like, how did that look for you, and how did you know, like, right away, or like what age did you know?
Well, at the time, and even in my my teenage years, I had no idea. But because of what I've learned about addiction and what an addict looks like, I can see that at a young age, I had trouble dealing with my emotions. I would fly off the fucking handle, whether it be mad or sad. There was no in between. I was very angry when I couldn't express my emotions, and I also internalized a lot of that anger. I was void filling, like I said, from a really young age. I mean, fuck, I was almost 200 pounds when I was 8 or 9. So I knew that there was something in me I could not fill, and I was obsessing about anything that could.
Yeah. No, I was just wondering, because my parents have all these stories of kind of my little brother. They're just oh, we knew he was gonna be kind of an addict or whatever, because he's just he's a stoner, but he's got a lot of emotional problems and stuff. And I remember hearing my whole life, even when we were teenagers, before they knew I was using or anything, about he has the worst addiction to sugar, and he has the worst addiction to video games and all these things. But I always think back of how their focus was always on him about that sort of thing, but they never really noticed with me, right? And I don't know, I don't really know if for me I felt I was always an addict before I picked up or what. I mean, I know there was some obsession there with certain things, but I didn't know if it was unhealthy obsession or if it was kind of socialized as unhealthy, because my parents didn't like me being on the computer all the time, and I wanted to make fucking stuff on the computer with Photoshop and 3D figures and stuff like that, and they're oh, you're just sitting around all summer on the computer, you're addicted to that thing, you know what I mean? And I think part of what happened with me was just resentment building about the things I wasn't allowed to do, and that's kind of what fueled a lot of it near the once I did start picking up, was just resentments and stuff. So yeah, I don't know, obviously you've had a lot of trauma in the past, like you said. You think that kind of played a hand in your addiction?
Oh, for sure, because I didn't know how the fuck to process anything.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to talk about it with anyone. I was in so much pain and hurting so much, and with different events happening to me, that I couldn't articulate how I was feeling. Because I was brought up with children are meant to be seen and not heard.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, your job is to get me a beer in the remote. Right? So you don't talk about your fucking feelings.
Yeah.
And I think that's slowly starting to change. But yeah, some people, some people aren't like me when it comes to realizing they're an addict at a young age, and that's okay, right? All of our journeys look different, but I think that's also a common misconception too, that you have to have all these bad, terrible things happen to you in order to use.
Well, right? I think it's relative too, right? Mm-hmm. There's people with all of our stories, right? People that have Mike's story, your story, my story, that never started using. You know what I mean? And there's people that are like in the ground today that fucking use themselves to death or killed themselves or whatever, like that circumstances that like couldn't make it to recovery, right? And we're kind of in that like happy like middle ground, I guess, where we were able to like realize, even if it took a long time, that there was a way out of it that, you know, was happy for everyone in our lives, right?
But looking back in retrospect is one thing. You're like, oh, now, yeah, these behaviors were there. But, like, what was the time when, for you, when you're like, okay, well, like, as far as, like, drug use or drinking, you're like, this is not, were you kind of clued in, like, maybe I'm not, I do it a little different than anybody, or, like, or what was the point where you're like, okay, like, they're kind of now it's kind of at the point where the dope's running the show and I'm just along for the ride. Like, what did that look like for you? Or like, what was that point? Was it by the time you got to Alberta, or was it before that?
Oh, before that.
Yeah.
I knew it the first time I went to a party and people were holding drinks where I was standing where people were making their drinks.
Yeah.
I didn't drink like other people. When people were like bringing out Coke and we'll just do a line now and a line later. Yeah, no, you're gonna put all that on the fucking tray. And
I want my part that I've paid
now,
for, and you can let me do that at my pace.
Yeah, and
which is all of it right now.
You can just do your little fucking key bumps. I don't know what the fuck that is. I always use differently, and I was aware of that, but I just didn't give a fuck. I didn't care. I didn't care because that made me feel better, and I didn't care that the people around me weren't using as much because that meant more for me.
Right.
But there was a point where, you know, the overdose was a huge eye-opener. And before that, like when I was 17, 18, I was dating somebody, moved to Alberta. I'd moved there 4 times for different people. Moved to Alberta and started smoking crack, was hooked right after, like right from the fucking get-go, even more so than I was when I started using Coke. And within a 9-month time period, I was about 120 pounds. Anyone that knows me, I am not that girl. And I looked like death. And I came home to see my mom, and I will never forget the look on her face. I was the walking dead. So for me, it was, I knew it in different stages of my life, but the people around me and seeing their reaction and how much it was making them go, holy fuck, she needs some help. It made me realize, well, this is different than everyone else. But I didn't know anyone who was doing a recovery thing or had gone through treatment. Fuck, I lived in Nanaimo since I was 11. I didn't even know we had a treatment center. I didn't even know what a 12-step program was.
It's insane, like,
right?
The amount of, I guess, like, ignorance to that sort of thing people have. Like, because I remember, funny side story, like, I was in Edgewood, I was in Extended, and apparently I matched the... I matched the description of a criminal downtown when we were going downtown to fucking do some paperwork or something for Buddy's taxes. And the police stopped us and asked for my ID, and I was like, dude, we're in Edgewood, like, we're going back to Edgewood, and the cop didn't even know who Edgewood, like, what Edgewood was. And I'm like, dude, we were flabbergasted. We had, like, 2 months clean. Like, how the fuck does the RCMP not know, like, where the treatment center is in town? You know what I mean? And then I was getting kind of belligerent with him, and I got thrown in the back of a cop car like 2 months clean. But you sparked in me, I remember, like, this is me, like, a year before I got clean.
Holy shit.
Yeah, so I know what you mean, like, where we were talking about last week of, like, yeah, I thought I looked sick. I was like 160 pounds. Fuck, I'm, like, working my way back to, well, I'm under double that now, which is good, but I got all the way up after Edgewood to fucking like 340 pounds.
That's a common thing.
And like,
we all put on 90 and 90. Yeah, for sure.
We're not dying. You know?
Yeah.
But there was one point when I was living in Alberta where I realized this is fucked. I had broken up with the person I was with due to my addiction. I had no vehicle. A client that I had given me their old, those old Dodge vans that were like maroon color that everybody's mom drove at some point.
Yes.
I had one of those. It was free, but it didn't go over 70.
Wow.
So you're from Calgary, so you're gonna know this reference.
Nobody drives slower than 70 in Calgary.
I lived in Airdrie, and my dealer in Airdrie had nothing, soft, hard, nothing. So I had to drive to South Calgary from Airdrie.
Down Deerfoot?
Nice. In the fucking merge side lane, going 70 with my hazards on to go get dope.
It's like a 100. What time?
This was 6 in the evening.
Nice.
Yeah,
Rush hour on a fucking road that's like the worst road.
Yeah.
It's like bumper to bumper, and like everyone's going like 100, but it's like bumper to bumper. Like,
at least.
Wow.
It's a shit show. Like I used to work like in the southeast and have to drive to the southwest to go home. And it like literally you might as well just work an extra hour because you're gonna be stuck like an hour and a half in traffic anyway if you leave at the time work's done.
Like I just didn't give a fuck, right?
And it's like, well, this is what
I need to do to get what I need.
It must have taken you fucking 2 hours, eh?
2.5.
Holy fuck.
2.5. Well, because I got there and then it overheated.
Yeah.
But that was a good excuse to get high while I was waiting for it to cool off.
Course,
and then I had to go back because I ran out. So I had to go back on my way back to Airdrie, right?
Yeah.
Priorities. So at that point, that was one of another. I had a few I'm fucked up moments, and that was definitely up there.
I think that's why I never got into coke a lot. Because I did it like 10 times, and I remember every time I was like, I fucking hate this. This is shitty. I don't even like being high on this, but like I just want more. Like I just want to go buy some more. Like,
but I can do some more.
Yeah.
Feed the beast.
Like but I remember just always every time being like, oh, this is fucked. I don't want to be doing this. And then just being like, yo, let's buy some more. Fuck it, And that scared the fuck out of me. Like.
But so you're saying like you knew that you weren't like a social. For me, that was I wasn't social about it at all. It's like I would tolerate hanging out with people who had dope.
Oh yeah, because they had what I needed and wanted. I didn't give a fuck about people. People were an inconvenience most of the time, and I can say I enjoyed my own company, but really I just wanted to get high and not feel judged, and not feel like I was the different user than everyone else.
But it kind of sounds like at a certain point, I know I'm an addict, but I don't give a fuck, got to the point where like, wow, maybe I need to start giving a fuck because other people really seem to give a fuck. I mean, like you're talking about showing up at your mom's house looking like death warmed over.
Well, that is honestly the only reason why I was ready to even remotely look at the fact that I needed help. Was I did not want her to bury me. My father had died about 2 months before I got sober, and they were together for 25 years. He died an addict, long-term drug use, and he never knew what recovery was or what that looked like, but she was pretty broken, and I realized, like, this is going to kill her, this is going to crush her. And honestly, as ridiculous as this sounds, I didn't want my dog to have to go to another home.
You still have your dog?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, fun fact, actually, on a positive note. This year, he turned 5, and I'd never given him a birthday party or anything like that. I always, pipe dream, yeah, we'll do this and we'll do that. And I never did it. So this year, my friend let me have him and like 3 or 4 other dogs over. He had a little birthday hat. We sung him happy birthday. And it was pretty cool, right? Like, to be able to do that. And it was something so little, but it just fucking filled my heart. He was so fucking happy.
Yeah, no, those little things, it's like you always kind of took them for granted, or you're just like, oh, whatever, it's just my fucking dog's birthday. Like, who cares? But it means a lot. Like,
well, yeah, it reminds me I'm not a shitty fucking person.
Yeah.
Right? I just did shitty fucking things.
Yeah, and now your dog knows how old he is. So it's like, if he ever gets ID'd, he knows.
So you come back to town, you get clean, that's not working out because you're not really dealing with your feelings or
at all,
or having recovery. So then you start like a 12-step program, you start getting some recovery, you start getting some fellowship, some support, but I think what we want to go with this is like, that's not necessary. I think a lot of people think that, well, that's the happily ever after thing, and there's a lot of trials and tribulations once you get clean and once you get some recovery and once you get some time in.
Oh, big time. I think my preconceived notion was that I would get into recovery and life would be great. That's it. There would be no more shit. All my shit would magically be gone.
Yeah, just from not being on drugs
or drinking.
Yeah.
I was wrong. There's trauma flashbacks, there's night terrors and night sweats, there's major PTSD, anxiety out the fucking yin yang, like all of these other things that I didn't know how to deal with that dope helped me deal with. I had to start looking at. And yeah, a 12-step program for sure was the major contributing factor to me staying in recovery. But once all these things started coming up, I had to get therapy for it. Anyone who wants to tell me in recovery that, oh, you don't need therapy, you don't need outside help, well, I did. And it was the best fucking thing I've ever done.
On that note, like, before you came to recovery, did you ever try to address any mental health issues?
Oh, yeah. I tried to commit suicide when I was about 11 and a half, shortly after I moved up here. And the solution to that was to put me into counseling.
Yeah.
And I saw a counselor, a free one, for a little bit, and it was great. I opened up a little bit, and then she retired. So I said, fuck this, I'm not doing it. And then I got prescribed an antidepressant, Prozac. I was on that from the time I was 13 to about 25, and I was on the highest dosage. And then when about a year before I came into recovery, they switched my meds to the same one my mom is on, who also is bipolar manic depressive. And they diagnosed me as that, which was great. I know what the fuck is wrong with me now. And then I found out in recovery that apparently when I was in active addiction, a lot of my mental health shit got even worse.
You mean crushing 8 balls and doing
apparently
Prozac?
It's a bad fucking thing.
Really?
Yeah.
And I had also snorted my antidepressants before when I was dope sick. So it didn't work. It just really burned my nose, and it was not fun.
Don't try it, kids.
Don't try it, kids. It's a waste of fucking time and effort. So struggled with mental health most of my life. And then about May this year, it got to a point that, I've been working my program for 2 years. I'm sponsoring, I'm, doing service work in the community, doing all these things, but I'm still struggling with these suicidal thoughts and idealizations. I went to my doctor. Oh, you need to go see a psychiatrist. Go to Brooks Landing. They don't give me, oh, well, you got to go on a 9-month waiting list. So I wait. Nothing. I go back. I get told that the only way I can get seen by a psychiatrist to get help with my meds is to go to the psych ward. So I had to go to the psych ward in recovery overnight, sleeping in a chair, so that I could just have somebody look at my meds. And finally, the psychiatrist that I saw said, it would have been over a year for you to even see somebody. So it's a good thing you advocated for yourself in this instance. And since then it's been great. I mean, it's not rainbow and sunshine all the time, but I'm not so scared to talk about my mental health stuff, because there's so many people in addiction who suffer from mental health issues who don't necessarily get the help because there's some sort of stipulation that recovery is the only answer. Whereas for me, it's been a multitude of things. It's not just one size fits all, right?
But I think that's a big point for anybody who's looking for better recovery, for long-term recovery, is that ultimately you have to be advocating for yourself. Nobody is going to advocate more for your own recovery than you are. And I mean, that's part of your story, is you're basically trying to find recovery on your own. You didn't go to treatment, and like you said, you don't have all the money's been snorted and fucking
it's gone.
It's gone. All the money's gone. I mean, even when you had it, the clean or sober, you probably wouldn't have spent the $70,000 on.
Not a fucking chance.
But so it's kind of where people are just in a position where like, well, I got to scramble, and I can definitely relate to that. Like, I got to scramble and figure out like, what do I do for my recovery? Obviously, getting into a 12-step program and working that program for yourself is a huge part for people, whether or not they go to treatment. But obviously, it's a free option. You know what I mean? You may or may not have to put $1 in that basket, but it's something that you can do at a street level.
Yeah.
And start working, and then you can. That was kind of my experiences. That's what I had to do, and from there I started talking to people and asking them like, what did they learn in treatment, or what do you mean you do cognitive behavioral therapy? What is that? And just kind of getting little bits and pieces of like a wellness puzzle and starting to put it together from that. Totally.
That was exactly my experience too, right? At first I was pretty resentment and bitter about not going through treatment and feeling like, I can't do this. I didn't do what everybody else did. And then I started talking to people because I started feeling comfortable enough to talk in a meeting, let alone to other people, and seeing, like what worked for you, and being open enough to trying it the fuck out. And if it doesn't work, saying, okay, well, let's move on. I mean, when I first heard the word self-care, I'm like, well, what the fuck does that mean? Like, I pluck my eyebrows, I shower? And apparently that's not self-care. So that's been a huge learning experience for me, right? Advocating for myself, doing nice things for myself, being able to say, no, I don't need a meeting tonight. I need to go to the gym or have a bath or, chill and watch Netflix, whatever it may look like. But there's, again, right, it's not that one size fits all. Like, it works for you, that's great, but it may not work for me, right?
Well, that's like the interesting thing about treatment and like just like 12-step programs and stuff is, we just kind of live in this society where it's like, oh, if it's free, it's like cheap and shitty, right?
Totally.
Whereas like I before I came into recovery through treatment and like the 12-step programs, like I went through like Alberta Health and like multiple psych wards and like dual diagnosis psych wards where it's like, okay, like you have mental health issues and addiction issues, and then I ended up in treatment, and like over that course of that year, like I was actually just getting worse and worse and worse, and they had introduced me to AA and like NA and stuff like that, but I didn't stay in the, like, they had this Alberta Health addiction program where you had to go every week, and it was like some counselor who's like not an addict, just like telling you whatever. I think she was like a nurse or something, just telling you about addiction. And I was like, oh, this is bullshit. And the last class was supposed to be like the AA guy comes and like advocates for getting into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I just blew it off, and I was like, fuck this, I'm not doing this shit, and ended up back in the psych ward. And I was talking to my mom about this, and she was saying like she was so surprised at like how much money goes towards like the healthcare system and dealing with these sorts of issues, and like how far behind like they actually are at helping people, right?
Yes.
And I actually, like last year, I called my former nurse at like one of the psych wards, because a buddy of mine back home was struggling, and I was asking her for some numbers, and I thanked her for like really helping me and kind of setting in motion like the series of events that got me out here. And I could just tell when she was talking to me like that she rarely ever gets that, you know what I mean? Like she's just used to like the people that it's their 5th, 6th, 7th time. Oh, it's fucking Josh again with whatever fucking delusion of grandeur he has today, right? And I was surprised like at the lack of success or the threshold that they would deem success is essentially just like you're taking your meds and, you know what I mean? Like you're good.
It's the surface level bullshit, right?
Yeah. And I I'm surprised, like, that. Well, I'm not surprised that it took you going to the psych ward to get access to that sort of thing here. Like, it's crazy. You can't even get a family doctor here.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually insane, but...
Well, what I don't understand is, like, you know, it's no fucking surprise there's an opioid crisis and a fucking fentanyl issue here. What I don't understand is why in the fuck there's not more help with mental health, so that it kind of prevents some of that crossover, right? I think a lot of people who society labels as a junkie or what have you on the street really is suffering with a mental health issue, and they're not even an addict. They're struggling in their own way, right? There's nothing to prevent those people or anyone else from going to drugs to kind of combat that issue.
Well, I was telling Mike, like, because like my first month clean was in the psych ward, and then they sent me home on a fucking Greyhound bus from like Claire's home, Alberta, like 2 hours back to Calgary, just dropped me off downtown, and they didn't tell my parents that I was coming, right? And so my mom,
holy fuck,
yeah, my mom hadn't heard from me in like a couple days, so she just called when I was on the bus. And they're like, oh yeah, he's gonna be at like the Greyhound station in like an hour or so, and we were talking like how many people would like that don't have like family support or like are in active like psychosis or actively using, like if a guy on that bus had just been like, hey man, you want to smoke a joint when we get off the bus, like who knows where I'd be at, right? And like to think that like Alberta Health, because I'm an adult, quote unquote, and I my parents don't have any right to know where I'm at because I was 20, 21, 22, like that they could just send me on a fucking bus like 2 hours away. It's not the problem
anymore. You finished your shit. You're c'est la vie, right?
Yeah, it's insane. Like it really makes me think, like when I see someone like you said, he's homeless, like talking to themselves on the street and shit, and like your first assumption's like, oh, this guy's like a fucking twacked on drugs, but it's like, fuck, he could have just got off a fucking Greyhound bus,
right?
Like it's insane.
There's definitely something to be said for the level of red tape and bureaucracy that happens at a level, and that's, I think, in a lot of ways, why these institutions and health institutions by the government is really some of the least efficient ways of dealing with it. I know a couple of friends who I was talking to getting ready to this podcast, they're starting their own women's trauma support group.
I think that's fucking great.
Because why? It's kind of like, again, it's just like you have to like you're talking about finding what works for yourself and making up your own strategy of recovery through trial and error. It's this do-it-yourself kind of ethic that ultimately can be pretty effective and hopefully pave the way and make it easier for the next person coming into it. And like what we were talking about, there's something to be said for maybe people shouldn't have to be a total shell of a human being before they can get some help.
Well, exactly, right? When I was trying to advocate for myself because I was in recovery and not using, I didn't get moved up the list because I wasn't in dire need. And because I don't have the money to see a psychiatrist outside of that, I was just on the bottom of the list, right? Well, you're not that low yet. And when I said, look, I'm either going to off myself or get loaded, well, there's not much we can do in the meantime. There's not much we can do in the meantime.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Fuck,
yeah.
Right? And I mean, fuck, if I was struggling that day or not working, my shit to the best of my ability, fuck, like that comment alone could have sent me over the edge, right?
Might as well just be handing out razor blades.
Right? Like, fuck.
Give us a call in an hour.
No fucking empathy. None.
Yeah.
None.
That's fucking insane.
And this, there's something else we're talking about too, is this trauma therapy and certain things. Well, this is the answer and this is how you deal with your suppressed memories. Well, I've done research on it myself, and there's something to be said about bringing up those old memories when you struggle as an addict with emotions anyway. Let's bring up all of this old shit and walk through life clean and sober. Like, it's not a one size fits all thing, right? And like, I think people are really, I don't want to say being duped or brainwashed, but you know, being really naive to the fact that that may not work for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that brings us to another point, and I think we probably all can agree here, at least, and hopefully there's a change coming about in the recovery community, that mental health and trauma are not unrelated issues. They're very much inside issues when it comes to drug abuse and addiction. And so that kind of brings us to kind of what we really wanted to talk about on this podcast was trauma. And because you've been through some pretty significant trauma, some pretty significant sexual trauma. And, you know, I was kind of talking to a bunch of female friends who had been through trauma and trying to understand it, because I think the problem is that, like you said, a lot of people have their own preconceived notions about it. There's, you know, I was talking to a family relation who works as a counselor now, and she's basically saying, well, no, you shouldn't be dragging up your trauma at all. There's research to suggest that that's not beneficial at all, whether you're digging that up in what you're talking about, which is like a hypnotherapy trauma thing. And she's saying that there might be a case that maybe you shouldn't be digging it up in a moral inventory, which for any of our listeners who don't know is a part of a 12-step process. The fourth step is you're examining your moral inventory and different things in your past. Resentments and abuse, and you know, your part in abusing and being abused, and how that's affected your perspective and your behaviors and your quote unquote character defects, or you know, defective character traits and survival mechanisms that we use as behaviors. So I mean, trauma is a pretty expansive topic. Mm-hmm. I had a couple of questions that I had kind of written on. I think the first one would be like, how do you think just being clean and sober has helped you recover from your sexual trauma?
Oh my gosh. I think, I in so many fucking ways, man, I couldn't even acknowledge or talk about it out loud before I got clean and sober. I couldn't even tell my mom what had actually happened. It was just very generalized and very surface level shit, because I didn't want to talk about it because I didn't want to admit to myself that it had happened. So for me, like in regards to that step 4 moral inventory, when I did mine, it was very surface level, but it allowed me to accept it so that I could actually look at it. You know, and it was told to me that whatever comes up, you're ready to deal with. You don't need to go looking for it. And that was huge for me, because I am an overthinker, overanalyzer, and I just want to bing, bang, boom, get her done. You know, now with the work I've done in recovery, I've been able to look at this generational curse on both sides, generational cycle on both sides of my family, where there's been sexual trauma at a young age on each side, and addiction at a young age on each side, and mental health, and realizing that hurt people, and all you know is all you know. So I've been able to not let that dictate my current relationships, my intimate relationship with my partner. That's been a huge one. You know, I've been able to work through these things and accept them more. I mean, fuck, this last year I started getting memories about my father that I had no idea about. And remembering pieces, but not really remembering everything, and just having a terrible feeling in my stomach, like I always knew this, but I was never ready to actually acknowledge it.
I think that's a good point. I was just going to say there is a difference because it's not like anybody's being expected to detail and recount their trauma in any kind of moral inventory in any kind of 12-step program. And one thing that I was talking with a friend who's going to be coming on the podcast is that, as she said, doing the step 4, the moral inventory, I just acknowledged it. That wasn't triggering for me. It was actually later on during a date when somebody engaged in an abusive behavior that kind of triggered it. And I wanted to go to my second question, which is, for you, what are your triggers, and have those triggers changed from being in recovery at all, or have you learned kind of more about that?
Good question, Mike. I wasn't aware that I even had triggers before because I always felt that unease and anxiousness and self-loathing from my trauma. I've realized that, initially my triggers were being looked at by men differently than other women. Being men approaching me and engaging in conversation with a intention for something else. And this is all my own perception, right? But, I even had issues with authoritative women because of the abuse that happened with my father not being acknowledged by my mother at the time, who didn't know. My triggers that I've realized in the last year are in my own relationship, and they're all sexual based. And it came up in the first 4 months of us dating, where because I was clean and sober and actually present intimately, I started feeling gross. I started feeling like I didn't want to be touched. I didn't want anyone to come in my bubble, even my own partner. It's like I went back to being 5 years old. So because I had a little bit of time, I was able to communicate with her and say, hey, this is not you. I don't know what's going on with me. I don't even want to be looked at by anyone right now. I would wake up from a nightmare and just scrub myself, and I would literally be red from scrubbing so hard to try to make myself clean. And then we did counseling over it, and couples counseling, and it was really cool to be able to be raw and honest and let her know where I was coming from and having that middle person. So we've had to do work around it. And even public displays of affection. I mean, I had been in really abusive relationships for so long that there would just be a hand movement, and I would just shudder and curl up into a ball, or a loud voice. I would want to hide in the corner. So there's been some triggers that have come up a lot, but with a lot of them now, I can acknowledge it and try to see and look at where it's coming from, if it's something I can change, if it's something I can talk about, so that it doesn't have to be a trigger, right? It doesn't have to bring me back to that point anymore.
Right, and even when you're talking about there's a lot of struggles and with just with a relationship, with having a romantic relationship with a partner. And as we were kind of talking about the other day, there's no manual for dating somebody who's undergone severe trauma. So I think that would bring me to the question of what could you suggest for somebody who's dating somebody who's experienced trauma, and they, what can they do to be supportive? What kinds of things do they need to avoid? Obviously, might be painting with a broad stroke, but probably a lot of times men are going to be liable to react in a way that is going to make the situation worse. So
completely. And I've had friends in recovery who have gone through that. I think the biggest suggestion I could make is communication. You know, I communicated very early on with my partner. Okay, I'm experiencing some sort of trauma flashbacks here, and, you know, we need to work on whatever. But when we don't communicate, how in the fuck is that person supposed to understand where I'm at and where I'm coming from, right? And then, you know, by communicating that to my partner, she was able to put in some sort of effort, whether in action, whether that be, you know, talking to other people, doing research on, you know, on the trauma that I had been through and how to show up and support me. And ultimately, you know, looking at her own stuff and seeing, you know, are my reactions coming from my own stuff? Is this even related to her, where she's at in her trauma, or is it my stuff, right? And not taking it personal, right? I think we all have pieces of our story that if people knew it, they would have a little bit more patience and tolerance for us, right? Which is why I think it's so important to speak your truth, right? Like, you know, if people knew what everybody was going through, we'd have a lot more fucking empathy, right? And I think in relationships, it's really important to have empathy if your partner's struggling through something, right? Because you would want that same in return, right?
I think that would cut down, just empathy in general cuts down on a lot of the problems we have is just intolerance and indifference to people and just this kind of air of self-righteousness.
Yes.
Like everybody is at all times suffering a moral failing. And like you said, when you know what you have an understanding of what they might be going through, what they're struggling with, it's easier to be more compassionate towards them. And, you know, like you said, especially when you communicate, when there's communication there and just honesty, it's...
So in like you were saying, in early recovery, you tried like dating a guy, like
not dating, but yes,
or like seeing a guy. Or,
seeing is nice.
Okay.
Seeing's like a better word. Yeah.
I was just wondering, like, did any of your trauma come up into that relationship?
Oh, big time. And good question. That was a huge contributing factor to me realizing I need to own my truth and speak the fuck up about it.
Yeah.
It brought up major shit and self-loathing and hatred, and right? The hatred and shame.
What was his reaction to like you being triggered by like your previous trauma?
Honestly, he didn't give a fuck. He's the type of person he was. But honestly, if I hadn't been where I was at in my willingness to want to stay in recovery, I would have just said, fuck it, because of all the shame and guilt I felt. You know, and I've had sponsees and known other women in recovery who do that same thing, whether it be on their own terms or from predatory behavior. They impulsively act and their repercussion is the shame and guilt, and they just want to say fuck it. And I totally relate to that. Mm-hmm. You know,
like how early in recovery was like that whole thing, because I'm just wondering, just because like
3 months.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say around like the 3 month point when people are like, oh, I'm good, and they get into those like early recovery relationships, like there's always so much friction because both of you are so fucked up still, but you don't really realize.
Well,
you know what I mean?
My first sponsor told me something at the time that really pissed me the fuck off. She said, how can you be in a relationship in early recovery when all you have to offer are your defects?
Yeah.
And that's a big one, right? I mean, fuck, even in friendships. I didn't know how to be a fucking friend.
I believe, because I remember talking to you at the point that the quote was, "What all you have to offer is your personality defects, and your pussy," or something to that effect.
Yeah, it was pretty brash, yeah. But there's some truth to that, right? I mean, fuck, I didn't have anything to offer anyone, right? I was learning what my story was and who the fuck I am, right? Like, I've heard how many times I've heard, well, we met in treatment and it didn't work.
Yeah.
Well,
shocker.
That's a fucking shocker, right?
No, and and everyone thinks, oh, well, it's going to be different for me or whatever, right?
I'm unique.
I'm the 1%.
Yeah.
I said that at Edgewood, like, they asked me to come be a speaker, and I said, like, no offense, guys, but, like, I haven't heard a new fucking idea from someone sitting in these rooms in so long, so if you think you have this, like, great idea that's gonna be like, oh, but you just trust me, like, you don't understand, like, I do understand, and, like, the fucking counselors 100% understand. They've seen this shit a billion times, like, you're not fooling anyone, you're not different, really, like...
Recovery is not a sexually transmitted disease.
Yeah. Imagine if it was, it'd be so easy.
It'd be so easy.
So easy. Fuck.
So that brings us to kind of like our next topic, which I think is kind of a common theme, as you pointed out, Josh. Predatory behaviors kind of is along the whole journey. Predatory behaviors is responsible for the trauma and is responsible for a lot of people's initial turning to drugs and substances and unhealthy coping mechanisms. And then you get into a recovery community, you get into a 12-step program, and people are acting not in the most spiritual of ways a lot of the time. So
we were talking about this on the phone, right? I just wanted to say before, like, we get into the fucking weeds with this one, like, I don't know your opinion, but for me, like, predatory behavior would be like a person with, like, a lot of time hooking up with someone with, like, not that much time. But, like, I don't know, like, in your opinion, would you say, like, your early recovery relationship even was, like predatory in any sense, or?
I would say I was the predator, because this person wasn't in recovery.
Oh, okay.
But when I first got into recovery, I had the naive perception that, well, we're all here to get better.
Yeah.
So everyone's, got a good heart and good intentions, and there's no bad people here. I'm safe. And about 4 months in, I was doing my first step 4, a little nervous, feeling kind of confident and comfortable, but not really. And I had met somebody in the rooms who I had heard speak and really sounded like he knew what he was talking about. He could quote things word for word. This guy must have it. And he approached me and asked me, what step are you on? And I told him, and he asked to meet for coffee, showed up at my work unannounced. And I thought, well, he cares. This is attention. This is validation. This is somebody who wants to help me. This is great. And he asked to look at my step 4. What does the layout look like? What is your sponsor having you do? I didn't see anything wrong in that. I didn't know any better. Showed it to him. Oh, well, you're not doing it this way, so you're not going to get the spiritual experience that you need to get out of it. And I thought, oh my God, well, I need to do this right. I can't do this wrong and not get recovery. So for some reason, I talked to my sponsor at the time about it, and she pointed out any healthy man in recovery is not going to help somebody of the opposite sex, period. Women with women, men with men for a reason. Mm-hmm. So for some reason, some part of me believed her, and I was able to disattach from that person. This person sent me terrible texts after, phone calls, harassing me, saying that I'm going to get loaded if he doesn't help me through the steps. And that in itself was pretty traumatizing, right? Like, I had been harassed and had men tell me what I need or didn't need to do my whole life. So it brought me back to feeling like a helpless victim again. And it is a miracle I didn't get loaded, and it is a miracle that I didn't continue to get 13th step by this person. Mm-hmm. Predatory behavior fires me the fuck up when I hear that topic. Because as somebody who was prey most of their life, predatory behavior infuriates me, especially when it's in a place that is supposed to help us heal from those things. It angers me that it doesn't get dealt with enough, that people want to have their blinders on and pretend like, well, we're all sick and, well,
you're powerless.
You're powerless and, it's just a defect. Fuck that shit. I'm sorry, but if you're not using and you're in recovery, but even if you're just going to meetings, like, you know right from wrong. I have no empathy for those type of predators. I just, fuck. And this person in particular too, right, has done it with multiple women since me.
So, and that was something that, so I've been posed to us. One of the questions was, what do you think the responsibility of the group is? What do you think the responsibility of... And, I mean, for the most part, I think it's easy to... It's not 100% across the board, but it's generally the most severe cases of predatory behavior are coming from men who are preying on vulnerable women. Not that there isn't women with recovery who are taking advantage of men.
Well, and it doesn't even have to be in a sexual sense either, right? Like, this same individual, I'm pretty sure that she's talking about, like, I would say is using the same tactics in a predatory manner with, like, men in early recovery to kind of hit them into his kind of, like, group or like and I've seen it with other people as well throughout the years of, like, almost like brainwashing or like I don't know if it's a word, but like cultizing, you know what I mean? Like
I don't know if it's a word, but that is a good way to describe that.
Like trying to create like a little cult around them of people that won't question their actions, like will totally justify their actions. It'll make them feel like you said, like they know right and wrong, but if they have a group of close-knit people that are all telling them like, oh, you're gonna get better, or like this is all right, or like, you know, this is the way, like it's not in the big book or whatever, like they can justify to themselves as much as like, and to the outside world to an extent, like that what they're doing like is okay. Justified and okay, right?
But totally. I mean, isn't that the common theme for both sexual predators and any kind of person who's engaging in predatory behavior? Is it's a lot about power too, and trying to have power over people, and that's something I think you see. There's a power dynamic, whether or not the group or the fellowship is saying, well, no, we're all equal, and nobody's better than the next person. There's definite hierarchies.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think we're all pretty ego-driven people in some aspects, right? And the power tripping, there's few people that don't recognize it, but there's even fewer people that talk about it, right? And yeah. I mean, we're a non-governed group, right? So whose job, air quote, is it to call people out on that behavior, right? I mean, back to the individual who's cultivate. What's the word you used?
Cultizing, or
yeah, it was good.
Cultivizing. yeah.
I think I don't know.
Trademark that.
The guy doing that though, right? Like, who's supposed to say anything or do anything? Women have tried. It's not their place. No one's listening. Men have tried, but it's still happening, right? So I mean, as healthy men and women, yeah, we can tell people who are new, make sure you stick with women if you're women, men with men, and really listening to people outside of a meeting and how they conduct themselves and handle themselves, right?
Mm-hmm. I really like what you said, like about just predatory behavior and your experience with it, because like I kind of got in some hot water because like it came up as a topic, and I basically was my intention was just coming across like how basically everything you said, right? Like it's personally I think it's the same thing, because predatory behavior is something that's definitely really watched out for, but it is kind of like swept under the rug. It's like a double-edged sword. Like, as someone with time who's a man, like if I see someone hanging out with a dude who's like a known predator, who's like a newcomer, like I'm less inclined to reach out to her just so I don't get labeled as that as well, right? And totally. So I said at the meeting, like I feel like it's a lot to do with like women with time, like watching out for other women, and like guys with time can't really do anything other than not be a fucking predator, which is like not that hard, right? I know a lot of guys that are pretty good at staying out of that fucking bullshit, but I think because I'm a man and I shared that opinion openly at a meeting, it kind of came across like I was making an excuse for predators, and like I got in some trouble with a few ladies.
But on that note, I think kind of what you're talking about, it starts to start to feel like some kind of like communist. It can start to feel like a communist witch hunt, where if you're getting this message of no man with time has any business spending any time with any woman, and they have nothing to offer. Well, I mean, that's just not true. We had a friendship starting early on in recovery. I've had friendships with a woman with a decade clean. There was no intention of developing any kind of sexual relations on either part. So I don't, is it kind of where you have one person acting out on a predatory behavior?
Well, and that's why I brought it. That's why it came across, I feel like, the way it did, because I was talking about the same individual and how essentially, it gets blanketed as like men kind of need to stay the fuck away from newcomer women, right? And it's like there's so many guys, like you said, right? And I've done this too, of like I've had time and hung out with girls that like didn't have that much time, but not in a sense of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna try to get fucking laid because this chick's super vulnerable. Just like, oh, I'm hanging out with a group of people that are newcomers and there's girls there, and I'm not gonna be like, oh, sorry, I have to go home, I can't go fucking bowling because this chick doesn't have her fucking 90-day chip yet. Like, I'm just hanging out with a group of people and some happen to be fucking women, right? And I feel like I agree with what you're saying, but I think optically, like, other people are so quick to judge, and like you said, it is kind of a bit of a witch hunt around that subject.
It's a very blanket statement about, I mean, it's also relative to the individuals and what their motives are, if they have ulterior motives, right? And the people that are aware of, what's going on, they have the ability to see, okay, well, this guy's got ulterior motives, and they can speak on that different perspective. But yeah, I mean, Mike, we were great friends from the start, right? Like, honest, funny, brash, right? And there was no ulterior motive on either end, right? But that's not the case with everybody.
Absolutely.
And to make a generalized statement saying, no, men can never be with women can never be with men, I think it's a very, I think it's almost setting people up for failure, because I know if people are telling me I can't do something and it's a huge no, I'm going to say, fuck you, I'm doing it anyway.
And that kind of goes to the point that, getting the witch hunts going and getting people riled up and arguing and getting on it's not actually stopping the people who are being predators. The one guy that we're talking about, who is kind of a known predator among the fellowship. I mean, there's even there's messages going around and I think that's something that ties into the next point that we're going to make is what can we actually do within the fellowship to stop this kind of behavior or nip it in the bud. I mean, because the fact of the matter is, just saying, oh, there's powerless and there's nothing you can do, it's not acceptable. And if people are relapsing, if people are dying because of this kind of behavior, something has to be done about it. I think for women to go online and say, you're new, you should know that such individual has been known to engage in predatory behaviors. We are advising you to stay. It's in your best interest to stay away from them. It's not totally unreasonable once somebody's. It's been established that somebody's engaging. Yeah,
they're not going off of gossip. These are real fucking facts here, right? And it's not he said, she said. It's multiple people know this. I think that's just That's, for me, that would be just doing the next right thing and informing people so that, you know, another woman doesn't have to go through what I went through and all those terrible feelings and emotions that came along with that. And, you know, at what point do we stop saying, oh no, you know, that's not my problem, that's not my shit, and say, hey, that's fucking wrong, somebody's gonna fucking die over this.
Well, on that point, I was just wondering, like, your guys' opinion on, like, is it always predatory behavior? Like, when someone with time, like let's say, gets in a relationship with someone that's, like, a newcomer, quote unquote. Because, like, there have been instances of people that, or like, what's worse in a sense? Because it's like, there's people that have done the, you know, oh, I have multiple years, this chick has whatever, few months, like, consensual relationship, ends amicably, it's not like a big deal, no one relapses kind of thing. But, like, is it worse to, like, cultivate a relationship with that woman and wait till 1 year and a day to fucking, because, like, in that sense, I see that as much more predatory. It's like false pretense, and it's like, yeah, I can wait it out like 6 months until it's socially acceptable to, you know, hang out with this girl in a like relationship, romantic or like sexual manner.
And if people recover at different rates, that who's to say that somebody who has 2 years clean has the same recovery as somebody, again, with
like 3
6
or 4
months,
or whatever,
3, 4, 5. Yeah, I don't know that it's always black and white, that there's always different dynamics that come into play. And there's always exceptions to the rules where, you know, somebody with multiple years ends up dating or even marrying somebody with very little clean time, and they both are, you know, happily ever after, I guess. Crazily ever after.
Crazily ever after, I think, is, yeah.
Well, I guess for me, like, my concern in those situations is, like, you know, we're addicts. We have a hard time with our emotions and processing them and change in general. So my concern would be for both of those people, right? Like, maybe, you know, is there some delusion in that? Is each person 100% a whole person, or is it one person being 75%, one person being 25? I mean, who's to say it's going to work or not work? But if they're not hurting anyone and no one's, you know, in relapse mode behavior, then I guess that's just their choice.
And that's a subjective thing for sure, right? I mean, as you were kind of saying, you're of the opinion that any kind of casual sex can be pretty damaging to somebody's recovery. Obviously, not everybody feels that way. It's funny because I remember my sponsor, and maybe this is just a different kind of opinion, saying, like, you know, it's okay for you to go have some casual sex with people if you're upfront about it, but you don't want to get into a relationship for your first year because there's more potential for you guys to... And I didn't listen to either suggestion.
Of course he didn't.
Well, I think, like, what I've seen as, like, a major issue as well is, like, putting these, like, time constraints on people, or not even constraints, but just, like, saying, like, once you have X amount of time, right? Because I, like, not in a predatory sense, but I've seen people, like, in the relationship sense of, like, oh, you need 1 year before getting in a relationship, kind of just, like, layman's rule. Being, like, I've seen so many guys that literally, like, at 1 year and a day are like, well, I'm fucking good to go. And it's like, that's just as sick as if you know, got into a relationship at 6 months. Like, you're literally, like, counting down, you got a timer on your phone, wake up, like, today's the day.
But the other
relationship.
But the other side of that is somebody, just because they have a year, they have multiple years dating somebody, immediately designated as predatory behavior, where somebody who, maybe there's a man who has a couple of months or can't put a fucking month together, are they getting a pass because they don't have time to engage in that kind of behavior? Because they're a newcomer themselves. Well, yeah, I used this person and used them as an object and was totally disregarding their feelings and their recovery. But because I only have 5 days and she has 30 days, well, it's not predatory behavior and there's no harm, no foul.
Well, there's definitely justifying. Lots of justifying, right? I mean, every person is different, right? Everybody's recovery looks different. Like, you know, and everybody has different motives, right? I mean, I totally agree with the whole saying, like the year label, because not everybody at their 1 year is really ready for that. You know, and as far as for what your sponsor said about the you know, the casual sex thing and not wanting a relationship, you're like, yeah, being honest is huge, right? Because you don't want to give anybody else the false sense or false hope. For me, I could not have casual sex with somebody clean and sober without feeling some type of way. Even though I didn't feel for that person, I still had feelings and emotions because I was cognizant enough to realize I don't care about this person. So that makes me not care about myself. So it brought up all types of other feelings and emotions, right? So I think it's really dependent on the person and where the fuck they're at, right? Like, you know, some people that start dating in early recovery, it works for a couple of years and then it doesn't.
Yeah.
Some people both get loaded and die. Like, you know, it's every person is different. So for me, I couldn't make a blanket statement on this is the right time to get in a relationship and this is the right time to fuck. Like, you know, it's different for everyone.
Now, one thing I wanted to kind of touch on was that we were talking about a certain individual, and obviously we're going to respect anonymity here, but who's kind of like basically a serial predator, right? And it's well known. But something that you kind of touched on was that it's undisputable, it's a fact, you've had multiple people come out. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that that's what this individual is engaged in. But to that point, can we touch on, well, what if he had only done it to one person and it's only one person saying that and he has a lot of other friends, and what happens and how do you deal with you've been sexually abused by somebody and other people for whatever reason don't believe you? How do you deal with that, and how do we deal with that and in a fellowship, just in life, in and out of recovery? How do you as the victim of sexual abuse get through the process of people not believing you?
Well, for me, people not believing me at a younger age was detrimental. And, you know, as a lot of women in recovery, we all come from sexual abuse and various amounts of trauma. You know, being able to speak up about it, even if it's to a few other women, and taking away the power of like not being heard and nobody believing me, and speaking out about it instead of internalizing it, I think for me would be the biggest thing, right? Like, you know, by no means is that going to fix it or take it away, but that person shouldn't have to be silenced or shushed just because they're the only one.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I would imagine that would be detrimental. You open up to your friends, you were friends in recovery, you're supposed to have your back, and then all of a sudden, no, he wouldn't do that, he's a bad guy, and then it starts to become kind of like a rape culture thing.
Right.
Well, I think it's like these other like taboo quote unquote subjects that we're talking about, like mental health, addiction in general, like sexual abuse and stuff. I feel like a lot of the time people want to keep it at arm's length just to not have to even like focus on it or deal with it and like, I mean, everything at arm's length looks a lot better than right up close, right? So it's like, you know, if you go on Facebook, you can see everyone's fucking smiling face and their fucking dog and their family and their baby, and you're like, oh, everyone has a perfect life and my life's shit. But it's like everyone's going through a bunch of shit that they don't want to like share, and when you do share something that's like really, you know, gritty and deep and like out there, a lot of people's first reaction is just like, whoa, like you know, don't talk about that with me kind of thing.
That reaction from people, you know, who are supposed to be open and honest and excuse me, non-judgmental, to get that reaction would, if I got that reaction, would deter me from continuing to be in the rooms.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right? Like, what the fuck is the point if people here can't even, you know, believe me and listen to me? What the fuck is the point? And
I think that's something that can easily destroy the integrity of a fellowship. It can tarnish the name of the entire program. I mean, there's, well, like I was telling you the other night, there was an instance, I believe, in the U.S. where it was kind of your textbook old timer takes advantage of newcomer. I don't know if I'm assuming he sexually abused her. I'd have to read the story, but basically the fellowship kind of came like, no, don't go to the cops, and that's not what happened. And when she came out about it, it makes the whole program, it makes the whole 12-step program look bad, and it dissuades people who are on the fence. Well, maybe I'll just wait the year to see the psychiatrist because I don't want to go get sexually abused at this 12-step fellowship.
Yeah, or be involved in the drama and bullshit in that, right? That comes with all those witch hunts and shit like that.
Well, even I don't even know if I'm supposed to share this, but whatever, I don't give a fuck. That's what this podcast's for. Even at like the treatment center in town here, right? There was a counselor who they have obviously the addicts go and do like the addiction side, but they have like a family like counseling thing where families like go or like family members will go for like a week or two at a time and like learn about addiction and all these things. And there was a counselor who actually started like an affair with a patient's wife, like when she was at this thing, right? He ends up being like they kind of catch on to it. Buddy finds out about it, like the patient, and so he is kind of on, you know, watch. I don't think they immediately fired him.
Oh,
because
good.
I think they was just one of these like internal, you know, conflicts that like not really many people are supposed to know about, and then he decides that he's gonna raise money and start his own treatment center. So he's raising money and getting a bunch of investors in on this like great treatment center they had set up. And so it's kind of like, oh, like he's already leaving, like it's easier if he just has a smooth transition rather than like us firing him and like whatever, and he's been a good guy here, blah blah blah, and like these are just allegations and like technically like, you know, it's just like muddied water kind of thing. And so he sets up this other treatment center with like everyone else's money, not his own, right? And like the first group of patients that come in, he ends up sleeping with one of the patients. Right, so that fucking treatment center goes under. A bunch of people lose money. This guy's like the patient from the treatment center in town here is trying to like sue the treatment center. Like this guy's in like multiple lawsuits, like with like investors, and like I don't know if that woman is trying to reach out and you know start an issue about it, but it's just like that's majorly predatory and just fucking scary, and even at like that level where like they have like such professionalism, like these people have like masters and like PhDs
and they're supposed to be
there for you, right? And this guy had been there for, you know, over a decade.
But I think that's the expectation that somebody who has X amount of years clean and sober, or somebody who's a pillar of the community, or somebody even who's a professional, who's a doctor, who has degrees, is going to have some kind of higher moral calling.
Yes.
Or is going to have some higher level of commitment to helping people. And when in reality, what we're seeing as a common theme through this podcast is that people are people. And when they're in jobs, sometimes they become indifferent and they're just there to get paid, and they're not compassionate. Sometimes they're not even competent, and sometimes they have severe moral failings. And
well, I think even like a story like that, it almost pushes me to kind of more so believe that some of this stuff is like some sort of mental illness issue as well, because it's like to go through 6 years of schooling, a decade on the workforce, like building all that rapport with your employer and all that, to throw it away for like getting laid a couple times and fucking taking advantage of women that are super vulnerable at like the lowest points of their lives, is like, it doesn't even make any logical sense. And like I think that's part of the problem too when we're looking at like a bunch of these issues, is we're sitting with like logical minds as third parties, like trying to be like, why would this person do this? Oh, it's because they're evil, or because like, you know what I mean, like because they're just assholes, or because like they're just like some mastermind. But I think like to an extent, like these people are also like pretty fucking sick, like in terms of their own mental health and their own like narrative of like who they are and like what they're doing. Because like I don't think logically you can't really explain like why someone would choose to like do that. Not that he didn't have a choice. Not saying that at all. But I think there is like definitely something that needs to be looked at in terms of like the abuser's like mental health when it comes to these sorts of issues, because
Totally.
it's like,
I hear what you're saying in the sense that it's not that, oh, well, now that you have a degree, or now that you have a year or 2 years or 5 years clean, that you have complete willpower over your actions, you have complete moral capability. You're no longer the victim of a lack of impulse control. You no longer have these mental health issues.
Permanently removed.
Yeah.
Well, I think, and with both these examples, because I know both.
God just sucked it out from the root.
With like the example that Kristine brought up of the individual in the rooms and like this counselor, I know both of them, like on a superficial level, I guess. But like from both of them, I get the sense
They're off your Instagram now, probably.
They never were on my Instagram. But like this counselor actually got me into Edgewood in the first place. Like he used to work at another treatment center. Then I spoke to him, and he got me in here. Like kind of tipped my parents off to coming in here, and I got from both of them that they had this like almost like angelic like persona, kind of like we were talking about at the beginning, of like, oh, like this is a super good guy, he knows his shit, like and all these traits that she was listing, like when she was talking about like her experience with like the predator of the rooms around here, and the fucked up thing is like there's so many people that actually are like just really good people that also have similar traits, so it's hard to like sift through like, you know, who's like the odd man out when it comes to people I should trust and not trust in like early recovery or any point in recovery.
Yeah, I mean, I guess motivations are only in people's hearts and evident through their actions. Yeah. We're at fucking an hour and 42 minutes.
Nice, guys.
Killed it.
It's been a super, I'm so glad to have had you on. Do you want to plug like where people can get a hold of you if they want to contact you for cleaning, for personal training?
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Mike. So my new kind of biz is I'm offering cleaning and organization services. I love helping people, and I'm really fucking good at cleaning. Yeah, I'm an Irish Mexican who doesn't drink or use anymore. I gotta let it clean power.
It's a pretty insane workout. I'm gonna say I've seen it firsthand.
So you can contact me at my email at Kristine8@gmail.com. So PRISTINEKRISTINE8@gmail.com.
Sweet.
And we'll put that link up on our YouTube and our Instagram.
Nice.
Yeah,
thanks,
sweet.
guys. Thanks for having me on here.
Thank you so much for coming. It was
And
awesome.
I'm super excited to see and hear all the other people you have on here. I think it's going to be great.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And I just wanted to ask before we end, like on the first podcast, like I made like the podcast like picture or whatever, like that old picture of me. because we were talking about it, I was wondering, like, do you have like an old picture?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, what do you want the
crazy times?
your
Oh,
face
yeah.
of this podcast to be?
Yeah.
I actually did a side-by-side about a month ago of when I was about 120 pounds and me now. So it's pretty crazy to see. It's like two different fucking people.
Yeah.
So I'll send you guys that because
Awesome.
it's pretty crazy to see that.
Yeah, because we're still working on like figuring out like the like artwork or like cover art, but I just thought like, oh, that'd be like a cool thing so they could kind of see that. So yeah, thanks. Like,
Get your face out there because yeah, man.
Yeah.
I think you've kind of told your story and shown like you're a great. We need more people like you in the recovery community, doing what you're doing, helping people, and yeah, it's just great that you know that the recovery's working and that you're proof of that.
Thank you.
So, thanks so much again for coming on. And
Sweet. I'll just plug the we got the Instagram Highly Addictive Podcast. Should be up and running by the time this is out. Also, if you want to send us questions or requests to be on the podcast as like either like a call-in guest, we're gonna try to figure that out with Skype, or as someone in person like Kristine here, you can just email us at highlyaddictivepodcast@gmail.com. All the links will be in the description on YouTube or wherever else we upload this. And yeah, thanks for listening, guys, and thanks so much, Kristine, for coming in.
yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
guys.